England, 1976.
They are punk rockers.
Disillusioned youth.
Raw, outrageous and crude.
Anarchy. Striking miners.
The new craze, they tell me.
Mountains of rubbish. The winter of discontent.
Worthless, nasty.
Societal decline. No future. Chaos.
They're a hero.
Welcome to Destroy, a podcast about how the punk movement of 1976 spawned a cultural revolution still being felt today.
You have to destroy in order to create.
I had ideas rattling around my head of what else to do with projection, and I ended up with REM. The radio song music video was a showcase really for a lot of the ideas that I couldn't get into previously. Just a thing that follows through in my career a bit, my fascination with projecting images and playing around with them, doing things that, aren't just showing a film on a TV screen.
The social unrest in England during the early 1970s was a complex convergence of unemployment and societal decline. The working classes were belittled for their perceived indecency and lack of education, while the rising middle classes were mocked for their shallow aspirations. In true English spirit, a few satirical auteurs such as Ken Loach and Mike Leigh emerged to reflect this conflict and the brewing national identity crisis. And like a starting pistol at the decade's outset, Nick Rogue's film performance burst onto the screen in a storm of outrage and praise, flaunting with sexual identity and celebrating the decade's looming cultural upheaval with vivid rock and roll verve. It was a tortured time, yet these cinematic pioneers laid down a radical path for a new wave of aspiring filmmakers to pick up a camera and capture whatever they could. My name is Richard Smith, and I'm your host. I'm an art director and a filmmaker. In episode 5, we meet a man who defied the mainstream mediocrity he saw around him. Channeling the energy of the burgeoning industrial music scene with his pre-punk assault on the status quo, he created pioneering films for bands like Sheffield's Cabaret Voltaire, Clock DVA, and the Human League. His visionary approach questioned the legitimacy of traditional filmmaking, enabling him to pursue a revolutionary path that eventually brought him to the forefront of American culture at the dawn of MTV. Destroy is produced by Be Right Back Studios, a full-service video and podcast production company that specializes in making music videos for up-and-coming bands and musicians. Visit berightbackstudios.com/destroy to learn more. This episode of Destroy is supported by The Extent or Measure of a Surface, Inc., a multidisciplinary design practice whose work in the music industry is world-renowned and specializes in building brands for bands. Whether you're an emerging artist or established musician, The Extent or Measure of a Surface, Inc. can help you grow your image on and offline. For more information, email destroy@thinkcreatebelieve.com. In the world of music videos, the early 80s were pioneering times. My guest today was one of those early pioneers. He started his career making experimental films for industrial music icons Cabaret Voltaire. Since then, he's worked with New Order, Depeche Mode, REM. He's made a film with Jodie Foster, and he's also directed commercials for Levi's, Verizon, and Coca-Cola. He was originally born in Penzance in southwest England, and he now lives in Los Angeles. Please welcome to the show, Mr. Peter Kerr. Peter, thank you for making time to be here today.
Richard, good to hear from you.
Like I just said, you're from Penzance and studied fine art. Maybe go back to that, being influenced by Marcel Duchamp and also Kenneth and so on.
So this is going back to 71. I wanted to go to art college. And I thought I'd be drawing and painting. And the college had a wonderful system for letting you try out anything you wanted. And I was kind of looking around one of the storage rooms in the college, and I found this clockwork camera thing, and it fascinated me. And I just took it to my teacher and said, "What the hell is this? And what do you do with it?" And he said, "Well, I don't really know, but I know someone who will help you out." And I had this guy called Richard Williams, who is not very well remembered now, but he was massively important in the world of British animation.
Okay.
And amazingly, he came down and he worked with me. I was on my own. It was just him and me with a clockwork camera, and he taught me how to animate with live people, which in those days was called pixelation. And that was really eye-opening for me.
So what's a clockwork camera?
It's the Bolex. It was, I think, invented in the 30s by the Germans. It was a way of making home movies affordable. So when you wind it up, you get about 30 seconds of shooting. You usually get 2 or 3 different lenses that slip around on a turret. And it's got a capability of shooting animation as well as live action. The camera became really well known in the Second World War. Everybody was shooting with the Bolex. The Germans, the Americans, and the English were using these little cameras.
Right.
But it was a good way to start because you have to learn the discipline of being able to get a shot or performance or whatever it is within the 30 seconds. You can't just let the camera flow like a video camera and edit it later. You really have to plan ahead and choose your framing and choose everything. It becomes a really good course in concentration on using your mind when you're filming. Anyway, I fell in love with the idea of doing films, and I saw that Sheffield Polytechnic had a film department and a lot of film equipment. So I moved up to Sheffield to go to that art college. And again, I was very lucky. There were just 3 film students and there were 3 teachers.
Oh, wow.
And those 3 teachers were filming documentaries at the weekend. So I'd always volunteer to, carry the tripod or be a second camera operator or help with the editing. And again, I learned a lot through just doing it, running around with a little handheld clockwork camera for someone else's documentary is a really great way to learn, I think.
This was about the same time the film Performance came out, is that right?
I think Performance was a little earlier, like 68, 69. But that was already in my bone marrow. That was just an amazing film. And I think the film itself, it launched hundreds, probably thousands of music video careers. So I was watching probably about 11 feature films or documentaries a week and shooting stuff for my teachers at the weekend and just messing around with film as a film student. So I just absorbed this culture. It was just really good for me. It was just like great food. And that was that brings us up to 75. And then at 76, I started a little non-profit production company with some friends who also graduated from the same film department. And that felt really wonderful because we had a grant from Channel 4, BFI, and the Yorkshire Arts Association. And the idea behind it was to become a resource for anyone to come in and to make a film if they have the funding, but we would rent out our equipment for free.
I read that was hugely successful.
Yes, it was. It grew from about 5 or 6 members to 80 odd, I think, at one point after I left. What happened really was I had this romance that working class people in Sheffield would be able to come in and get a grant from somewhere, and then we would help them make a film. And we had this romance that it would be kind of helpful to just the working class people, really. And then we had some people from, I think it was from Chile. These refugees came in and they needed to use our equipment to do some kind of like anti-fascist propaganda film or something. We never saw it. It was just, we thought, wow, this is amazing. But what I found was that it grew into something a little bit more typical, really, where I was kind of working in administration more than actually making my own films. So I got a little impatient. And meantime, I was seeing things happening in Sheffield on the music scene, like Cabaret Voltaire, who they were saying back in like 75, 76, oh, we're not musicians. They did this gig in the gallery at Salter Lane. It blew me away. And I thought, wow, I want to work with these people. And it didn't feel like there were a lot of punks in Sheffield. I think the industrial music thing happened very quickly after the initial kind of explosion and excitement of punk. And so I was 23 in 76. I was too old to be a punk. So I was a bit of a usurper in the clubs listening to the music. But I was just thinking this morning about the way that people did want to move away from the norm. And I was figuring that's what I was trying to do in my way with music video. I'll call it film, but the idea of not putting up with conventions and the deadening mediocrity that seemed to be happening with a lot of the film and TV you were seeing at home on the TV screen.
Right.
And so I thought, yeah, in my smaller way, I was a bit of a rebel there.
I think you definitely
Yeah.
were a rebel. I mean, looking at your early work particularly, and even latter
Yeah.
work.
But I must say, the idea that a lot of the industrial bands or the alternate bands, whatever you want to call them, they were more interested in having film projected on stage with them or making little music videos as part of their own self-expression. And with punk, I always felt, well, it's fucking great. It's marvelous music. It's reaching all through these ideas of rebellion for the young people, the frustration, the politics, fashion, graphics. All of this was happening, but film wasn't really part of that movement. And when I did a bit of part-time teaching in the film department where I studied, one of my students was Adrian Wright, who then moved into the Human League.
Okay, yep.
And because of that connection, the Human League were the first group of musicians to employ me to shoot a little film. And it was like 4 or 5 minutes driving down a motorway, the camera pointing forward. It's just a classic, ordinary shot, really, but they wanted it projected behind them for one of their gigs.
Huh.
And I thought this would be a really nice way to work. And when I was running the Independent Film Company, I fought really to get a grant from Yorkshire Art Association to make a short film. And that's how I got Johnny Yesno film made. And I remember distinctly, still very clearly, a gig at the lead mill in Sheffield. It was a big warehouse space. And it was a charity gig. Cabaret Voltaire played first, and it was incredible. And then after that, the Human League came on. And the two bands together in one night like that was just really incredible. But I was thinking at the time, oh man, I'd really like to get Cabaret Voltaire to do a soundtrack for the film that I'm working on right now. So I kind of always felt that their music and their attitude was a lot more, if you like, cinematic. You know, it was just more open to so many other influences, whereas the Human League I thought were amazing. But it was very contained music. Do you know what I mean? They didn't really need projections. They didn't need that. So I really kind of wanted to establish some kind of relationship with Cabaret Voltaire. And once I made the film, as I was editing, I was using the Voice of America as a click track or a scratch track, just to give people an idea of the atmosphere I wanted to build up in the film. And I found that the music tracks and the images and the editing all kind of lined up really well without hardly any input from me or my editor. It was quite extraordinary.
I watched that the other day and I was struck by how so much of the imagery and the music in Johnny Yesno, there's this sort of ethereal, really atmospheric feeling in the music, and it really comes through in the film.
Yeah.
What was the reaction to that?
Oh, it was flying in the face of the convention. You know, back then the feminist movement was quite strong, and there was this feeling that women should be able to make films without men. You know, that was all interesting. And I was talking with a friend of mine, and I said, if you did a film about how men treated women, but you made it attractive to men, it would probably change things quicker than just teaching to the converted, as it were. And that sounds a little rude, but the idea was to do something which was about a guy who's confused about women, basically. But at the same time, on a formalistic level, I didn't want it to be another naturalistic, realistic British film that I love. I mean, Ken Loach is my movie god, but I wanted to go back to the idea of the theatricality of some film language, like film noir, in particular British film noir, and shoot it in color and have American cars and some woman in glamorous dress and so on. It completely flew in the face of the conventional culture back then.
Right. It has this almost David Lynch feel about it. And now that you're talking about
Yeah.
film noir, I can see that seems obviously a more relevant starting point. And the duality of the woman, right? It's almost dreamlike. I don't know if that was intentional or not.
Yeah, it was like the male fantasy versus the reality of this woman who was a victim because she ends up being shot. And it's intentionally very simplistic, but why not, you know? And also the film evolved a little bit away from that political stance to just pure film for me. My favorite part of the film is the hallucination sequence, we called it, where he's been drugged and he's just going through this kind of horrible hallucinatory trip and then coming out of it sort of cold turkey. And I was very pleased with that sequence.
The thing I liked about it a lot was that it was almost narrated.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Which it creates this really interesting distance between what you're seeing and what he's saying, or what's being said rather, which I found really powerful.
What I thought was great for me, purely on a personal level, was that it was done with very little communication. It was all done with faith and instinct or something, and the two things just came together. We never really sat around and just discussed at the meaning of anything. It was just, this is great, let's just keep doing it. And that was really, really refreshing way to start.
It's interesting because the output was very unique. You know, I don't know much about film. It seems very unique in its approach. So I'm going to go back a little bit to maybe where that was coming from for you in terms of your inspiration, your influences, even your background.
Yeah, so having watched a fair amount of films, either conventional films, Hollywood, Japanese, European feature films, and experimental films, the avant-garde, whatever you want to call it, I always felt that the experimental, the avant-garde leaning films really lent themselves to the idea of working with music, having music as the dominant part of the soundtrack and almost the energy of the piece at times. And so looking at the surrealists, Duchamp, Buñuel in particular, it was just strange and odd. There's one film I remember of a male dancer. It's a man he's got a suit on at least, and he's standing on a glass platform and the camera's underneath looking up. But he also has a dress on and he's doing a kind of whirling dervish kind of dance. And that was it. That was the film, I think, for about a minute. But it's quite startling. And that was in the 20s. So then you move through to the 60s in California with people like Kenneth, who, again, his films are really dominated by the soundtrack. And there's one called Custom Car Commandos. And all it is a very handsome young man with a kind of pink, fluffy rag. And he's kind of getting the dust off of a pink roadster car. And that's all it is. That's all I remember. But I saw this in 1973 or something, and things still stick in my mind. And that's one of the things I thought, well...
His work was very provocative.
Well, really. I mean, obviously, intentionally so, very gay-orientated and very edgy and mysterious, but with also this sort of pop sensibility of using doo-wop and early soul music. Very interesting. And then Performance came out, and I think that was another film that blew people away, seeing that. That was just a huge revelation for me that you can do a film that's, looks like the editor had a fight with a lawnmower or something. The editing is completely nuts. And I actually made a note, because this guy, I think, deserves a lot of praise. He's called Frank Mazzola. And he was just a journeyman editor working out here in LA. And Donald Cammell and Nick Rogue were really struggling with the edit of the film. It wasn't coming together in any conventional narrative, linear way. And they gave it to this guy in Studio City or somewhere, and he started to mess around, chopping the film up and putting in freeze frames, anything really to give it something. And it worked incredibly well.
Yeah.
And I haven't seen the film for a few years, but I've seen it 5 or 6 times now. It's just immensely powerful use of film editing, and the imagery is amazing too. So I think it gave people confidence that you could do something in film and people would watch it that isn't, a comedy or a narrative film. And the other huge revelation was seeing the music video for Strawberry Fields. And, when I was a kid, I loved that period of the Beatles.
It's similar to some of your work.
Yes. Well, also, I tell you something, Richard, the other thing I was thinking is one of the great things that came out of punk music in particular was that idea that you could put out a record for like 10 quid or something. And I think my favorite films or videos like the Strawberry Fields one, it comes out of low budget, really.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what do you do when really you don't have a budget except for some film?
Right.
And the lab costs. And that, I think, created in my work that attitude of how do people make films when they have no money? Normally, it would be a documentary. Documentaries had a huge influence on me, and the idea of running around with a clockwork camera, just filming what's happening in front of you with absolutely no ability to design the set or the location. It became, in a way, the camera that was getting a documentary-like recording of what was going on, and the editing. The editing became the production value for me.
Hi there, sorry for the interruption, but if you're enjoying the show, please leave a review or a comment. For the latest news and updates, make sure to also follow us on Instagram at Destroyed Punk Podcast. Thank you, and now back to the show.
Back in the day, I had these rules, right? I had a big ego, so I'd say editing music videos, it should be a form of percussion. And it struck me that a lot of conventional music videos back then, the editing was very arbitrary. If you look back, you might really like the imagery, but
right.
The editing's really boring, unexciting, and using film language in a really kind of lazy way. And the other thing that was a big influence on me was when I was doing projection films for Cabaret Voltaire, and the song was 4 or 5 minutes long, right? Maybe even 6 minutes long. And They would give me like a roll of film. That would be the budget. Here's a roll of 4 minutes. You've got 4 minutes of film and there's a 6 minute song. So Peter, go at it. So then I went back to the idea of some of the attitudes to the French New Wave directors who were using repetition. Godard and Alan Ruckler were interested in repeating shots and hacking away at the film in a really exciting way. So then I thought, okay, I'll just do that then. So I just repeat some camera moves. And all the time, my intention was always to make the editing match the music in some way. Obviously, percussion and rhythm being the main point.
You reminded me of the Burroughs cut-up technique, his approach to writing, and it made me think of that in terms of reference for what the Cabs were doing, and then visually, obviously, what you were doing.
Yes, right.
At least that's my interpretation. Something that strikes me a lot about you in your approaches is very ingenious. Like, as you were talking, you reminded me of the Depeche Mode video you did for Stripped, where they're carrying what look like televisions. Is that right? It looks like an industrial kind of, I don't know what, there's nighttime, and it starts with a car engine exhaust, and then there's a lot of moments where somebody's holding what looks like something in front of the camera, and a projection is going onto what's being held.
No, they were just sheets or thin hardboard painted white to act as screens for the projections.
It's a brilliant feeling that it creates. Kind of makes you wonder how you did that.
When I was working for the Cabs and still doing bits and pieces for the Independent Film Company, I was also getting a bit of money as a projectionist. So I kind of learned a lot about projection, and then touring with Cabaret Voltaire and projecting their films for them. So it was like a projector was just like another form of camera for me. You just pick it up and point it somewhere. So projection was, again, just in my bone marrow, was something to do and try out. And with Depeche Mode, again, it was a matter of budget and money. We had enough money to shoot film, have it edited, put onto the projector, have the projectors moving around in Berlin at night. I think also, to jump way ahead for a second, I had ideas rattling around my head of what else to do with projection, and I ended up with REM. The radio song music video was a showcase really for a lot of the ideas that I couldn't get into previously with the Depeche Mode or with Cabaret Voltaire. Just a thing that follows through in my career a bit, my fascination with projecting images and playing around with them, doing things that, aren't just showing a film on a TV screen. And also going back to the idea that you don't have money for an art department and to create a fantasy world. You're shooting pretty much in the real world. And I always felt like it'd be nice to do something with the camera that's different. Why does the camera have to be upright? Can it be upside down or on its side? Can you throw it off a building? A lot of stuff I was doing back then was technically tough on people because the equipment was heavy. Anyway, there was one revelation I had. With Johnny Yesno, we built a rig so that the camera would be strapped to the actor. And so a friend of mine, the guy that invented the up and over machine that everyone likes in the Sensoria music video.
Was that Tony Hill?
Tony Hill, yeah. Anyway, he created this frame to put a 60mm camera, and the frame was really heavy in itself. And then you've got a 60mm camera on the end of that. The weight was quite immense. I was really happy with the actor who just kind of did it. It was quite dangerous. He was upside down on a 60-degree slope in a quarry with probably about, 50 pounds, 60 pounds worth of equipment strapped to his body. Anyway.
It wasn't like a steady cam.
A steady cam is basically designed to create smooth movement. This is the opposite. It's a great way to show someone's disorientation in a horror film or something. And of course, now with lightweight cameras, it's a lot easier for the performer or the actor to wear it.
Do you think the idea of the freedom of not having a budget seemed to really inspire you? Did it seem the opposite when the budgets came along, when you're shooting something, say, for Verizon or a company like that?
Yes, it does. And you're using an entirely different part of your brain. It's the idea of a camera as part of your own neural system. I think that's what a lot of photographers and camera operators feel. You're very much linked to that, magic machine. When you have a budget for a commercial, other responsibilities come in terms of your organization.
Right.
And it's immensely expensive to have a union crew going into overtime. It would kill your profit. On a micro level, it's a bit like, you see those films of how they create nature documentaries. You have like a tabletop and a guy's filming a beetle and there's 5 spotlights and he's got this weird camera thing with a snorkel that can track through a pretend piece of grass to see the little beetle. Commercials feel like that on a bigger scale.
I love that analogy. That's fantastic.
Other commercial directors would probably disagree. So I think a good example would be working with REM, for instance, again, to jump ahead, but I was able to get support from them, their manager, and their record company to be given a decent amount of budget so I could try these things and still work within the kind of practical world of union crew and record company and needs and restraints and deadlines and so on. So that was great in a way, having spent a fair amount of time with Cabaret Voltaire. The budget was the price of some Super 8 film, to being able to say, well, no, I can now shoot in the desert, or we can
Right.
rent this warehouse for 3 days instead of 3 hours, and so on.
So you, going back, so you saw the Cabs perform at the Salter
Yeah.
Lane School of Art, and that was inspiring. You then worked with Human League at around a similar time. So between that moment, which was like the mid 70s, and then the early 80s, when you started to work with bands like Depeche Mode and so forth, what happened in between? Were you working with other musicians?
Yeah, I was. I kind of stopped working at the Independent Film Company. I just got frustrated, and the thing that turned things around really was when I did Sensoria, and I realized after a while that a lot of musicians and bands in England are really thirsty for something like that.
Right.
So I was in Sheffield. I was doing my thing. I was picking up bits and pieces of money, whatever would bring in a little bit of money. And then I kept getting these calls from people, bands in London. I remember getting a call from Shriekback and Scritti Politti. And I was then building up a bit of reputation as someone who's doing more interesting work than the conventional. And so it was only a matter of time before I moved to London and was able to start a career. So it was really Sensoria that turned things around for me. It was a music video that never got played on English TV except for in one show, which was Max Headroom. Meanwhile, I'd been hearing about this new thing in America called MTV.
Right.
And back then, this is 85, back then they had a chart table of most requests for music videos.
Right.
And this Sensoria video was there in the top 20 for 7 months.
I know, it's insane.
And I thought, God, I got to get over there. It was also interesting, the Museum of Modern Art in New York decided to recognize music videos as a form of art. And their first 3 videos that they procured, that put into their collection, was Sensoria. The other one was, I think it was Sex Dwarf. Yeah.
Soft Cell?
Soft Cell, yeah.
Right.
And then the other one was, I was thinking it was called Close to the Edit. It was Art of Noise, and a great director, Zbigniew Rimczynski. He was a very interesting director for music videos. I think those are the first 3, and I just thought, wow, okay. I felt like I needed to get to America as soon as I could.
Right. Capitalize on that success, as it were.
Well, yeah, and also it was nice to have your work welcomed.
All of that brought you to, the 80s and America. Yeah. And doing a lot of video work. What was that experience like?
I think one of the great things about the Americans, especially in the film industry, music industry, they really welcome new talent coming into the country. And it was a little bit of a struggle at the very beginning for me to educate the production company that it was cooler to film a band in a warehouse or in front of an oil rig than in front of a Beverly Hills swimming pool. But yeah, they got it very quickly. And also the commercial industry also cottoned on again. They just felt this was a very kind of fresh way of reinventing the norm. I was really welcomed with open arms by everyone, really. And also I liked the fact that there was a kind of meritocracy as well in American society, where if you came in, you proved to people that you had interesting ideas, you had a plan, you could respect people, you could get things done, you'd excite people. What didn't matter where you were from or what your accent was, and I thought that was just marvelous. So I felt very much at home straight away. And I found that a lot of the crews who were coming in off of really big movies and working with like amazing directors, they would have a respect for me too. So it just worked incredibly well.
But it was a short window, as it were, right? You kind of stopped making video. Why was that?
I'd hit a little bit of a brick wall creatively. And I remember doing a music video for a Black American R&B artist. And I shot with two different films. We had the conventional 35mm neg, which smoothed everything out. It's glamorous, and most music videos are shot on that. But I had also a little Super 8 camera shooting the guy, and the film came out. It was just awesome. He had really black skin, like Miles Davis, really dark,
Right.
amazing color to work with. And the Super 8 film made him look just magnificent. I thought, actually, sorry if that sounds a little overblown, but it was just fantastic. And the management, the guy and the record company just hated it. And they were saying, this was at a time, again, with MTV, where it was really difficult for Black artists to be accepted, right? So everyone was saying, well, God,
Right.
why are you making him look so black? And I'm thinking, God, this is really messed up.
Yes. It's almost like a
Yeah,
absurd version of Anchorman or something.
exactly. It was absurd. And if
Yeah.
they could completely hung on for about another 6 months, MTV completely shifted into showing rap and hip hop music. But anyway, so I just thought, well, I'll move away from here for a little bit. This is really messing with my head. And at the time, I could see commercials career was viable. So
Right.
I moved into commercials for a while. And then again, my career hasn't been a linear growth, a little graph, 45-degree arrow. It's all been meandering, and I've made mistakes and so on. And I ended up actually hitting a wall in commercials as well. I was working with a company I wasn't happy with, and I was doing very boring work. I picked up the phone to a woman at Warner Brothers who I'd known, who was working in the video department, and I said, I can't do any more of this commercial stuff. Is there a band around? I said, I'll work for free, even just let me do a music video for somebody, send over some music. And she said, have you heard of REM? Because they're looking for someone. So that was a really nice thing. So I was able to establish working with REM, and that got my juices flowing again.
But so those got you back, at least for a moment. It sounds like it got you interested in doing music videos for a little bit longer.
Yes, exactly. Very much.
So tell me about the film you made, The Dangerous Lives of Altar Boys. So tell me how that came about.
Well, when I was still living in Sheffield and I was reading about the new directors coming onto the scene in America, one of the factors was that I'm talking about Scorsese, Coppola, Brian De Palma, people like that. They started their careers working with Roger Corman. It was typical to come out of film school, go and clean out Roger's garage, and then start working on something, and eventually you'd get to direct a movie. I thought that was just absolutely marvelous. So I had a romance about that. But by the time I got to LA, he was closing up shop, and I was so busy doing music videos, I didn't really have the time to go over and meet him and offer to clean out his garage. But there was always that burning desire to do a film one day. And
Right.
it's just a matter of happenstance, really. After working on a few scripts and getting nowhere, someone who had been on one of my commercial projects, one of the crew members, and he said, do you want to work on Dangerous Lives of Altar Boys together? And it was a really rocky road. I don't want to bore people, but I found it a little too chaotic, the whole process. It was a very puzzling kind of way of working,
Right.
and immensely wasteful. And so anyway, the film got made. It was a very difficult shoot. I put 90% of my energy into helping the kids. And of course, the highlight back then was filming with Kieran Culkin,
Right.
who was absolutely amazing. But again, it was like the stories you hear about filmmaking that would never happen in a commercial or music video. For instance, 2 weeks before we were shooting, Kieran decided to hop over a fence and he broke his arm.
Oh my God.
So then we thought, and he was like, I'm fine. And some of it worked out really well. Like we had him as a goalkeeper.
Okay.
So it was funny. But that things you don't think about, I don't know what the metaphor would be. It's a bit like having a mile-long freight train trundling through the prairie. It's just going to go. And you do your best and you put all your most important elements, whether it's a scene or a line or a reaction, you make sure you get them and you let other things go a bit. And you can't do that with a music video or a commercial. People's minds are on the impact of the visuals and being absorbed by the music, and it's over in 4.5 minutes or 30 seconds. It was a revelation for me how amazing a feature film is as like an artifact.
You got a Spirit Award, right?
Yes, that's right. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. But I also realized that I didn't really know how to play the game with the studio system. I just didn't know how to use that machine in particular. I couldn't figure it out, how you deal with weird casting choices. You know, you have a meeting about the main character is a 15-year-old student girl who wants to become a tennis championship, and people are saying, well, you know, we can get Venus Williams, who at the time was about 35. Do you know what I mean? Things like that, I would just blow my mind. And I just couldn't figure it out. And I really do admire directors who I've known and hung out with who knew how to play that game. They knew how to work that industry. And I just couldn't figure it out. And it just wasted a lot of time, a lot of people's time and my own time. And I lost some family time. And so I decided to just stop.
Something I wanted to get to was, you seem someone who's very compassionate. And I mentioned this to you before. There's an interesting through line for me from the Sheffield.
Oh, the Sheffield Independent Film Group.
Right, the Sheffield Independent Film Group up to today in California, you making short films for the Santa Monica City Council and some others. There is this kind of wanting to give back to the community. You talked at the beginning about wanting to set up in Sheffield for people to be able to make films. Is that true?
Yes, I think. Thank you for that. Yes, I think having spent a long time doing commercials and making a fair amount of money over the years, so my feeling was, along with my wife who was producing with me, was let's give back. We don't have to work to keep the house.
Right.
We can volunteer to do these films wherever we're needed. We would reach out to people, and that's a part of me, and it's something that I had ignored for a long time. As a director also, you have to be very selfish to keep a career going.
Right.
And it's a lot of stress management involved as well. It was really important, I think, that we took the time to make some films that had a real purpose, that would help people.
Not to put words in your mouth, but there's a message, right? There's a message that you're trying to tell people don't know about. I mean, it was very much that documentary mentality in a way. It's to kind of bring a story to people's attention that perhaps they're not familiar with.
We're really proud of the little pieces of work we did.
These films you made for Santa Monica and the Yosan University, what were they about? Or just elaborate on maybe some of those films you've made.
Yes, at the time, Santa Monica City, they were attempting to be quite left-leaning. And it reminded me very much of the Sheffield Council when I was there, who were also really good at lateral thinking and really solving issues with Santa Monica City Council. My wife was acquainted with the woman who was working for the council, and she pioneered this idea of well-being, which became quite a global movement for a long time. The idea was that you could measure people's well-being, not happiness, but well-being where you have your health, your pride, your job opportunity, your fresh air, your good food, all of that, a sense of community, all of that mixed up and enmeshed into almost a puzzle, almost like a difficult puzzle to see how all these different things have effects on people. And so I wanted to do a study to see how you could actually interpret this kind of mess of non-data, if you like. Just how could you find out how to analyze all this and then create a city that supported solutions for it?
All right.
So the first thing we did was we did a little film, a little budget. We did it for free. You know, the budget was just editing really, because I can't edit at all. So we needed money for an editor. But basically, there was a charity set up by the Bloomberg Foundation. He wanted to create a symposium in America. He felt that cities and city mayors were the only political people changing society in America. So the idea was to encourage these cities to basically bid for a grant. He was interested in well-being too. Mm-hmm. So we did this little film and it worked out really well, and they ended up getting this really substantial grant to actually start doing the research. And then they came back to us to make a film about how it's going along.
There's a really nice kind of loop there between, you know, when you left Sheffield Polytechnic and today. Sorry to jump around. I wanted to go back to one thing you touched on, this notion of being drawn to the unconventional.
Yeah.
There seems to be this desire to push the boundaries. Is that true?
Yes, I think so, yeah. And film happened to be where I just felt I was adept at doing it. I couldn't have written a play or a novel about it. On a political level, I was always pretty much a lefty and hating people who just became conventional. Whether you're looking at a Conservative MP in England or a TV show or a local policeman, mm-hmm. or a bunch of skinheads who are having fun shoving an old woman off the pavement. They're following some rule and making their lives easy in a way for themselves. And I never wanted to be that. And that feeling, I think, became squeezed into a filmmaking career.
Were you like a rebel as a young kid?
No, not at all. No, totally boring. Yeah, no, I had a very quiet upbringing.
You were a quiet troublemaker, maybe?
Very much, yeah. Right. Unconventional troublemaker, very much.
Right.
Yeah.
No, it's beautiful. I love that. I love that picture. Even then in that statement you said, I think what you said was not following the convention of people who were trying to be unconventional.
Yes,
right.
That was part of it too. I remember hearing somewhere the very first single that had a drum machine on it, and it was Electricity by OMD. Right? And I remember actually buying that and thinking, wow, this is really interesting. And I was hanging out with the Human League at that point. And I said, hey, you got to come over to my flat and listen to this record. It's a bit like what you guys are doing, but it's a record. Right. I can imagine there's the three of them in my little two-room flat listening to an OMD single, nodding sagely.
I wish there was a camera on the wall to capture that.
Oh my God, that would be so good.
That's such a poetic image. I love it.
So brilliant. I know.
We've been chatting for a while, and I could actually talk to you for a long time. It's really fascinating hearing you talk about this stuff. It's really insightful, and I really appreciate you making the time.
It's been great, though. We've covered a lot of things I haven't thought about for a long time, and that's been a joy.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Your perspective is really inspiring, so I appreciate you chatting. All right, Peter, thank you.
All right, Richard, it's been a real pleasure, and I hope that was plain to see, and I hope to speak to you soon, yeah?
Yeah, take care.
Take care. Bye then.
My name is Richard Smith, and I'm your host. I'm a filmmaker and art director, and once upon a time I was part of the big 80s. I designed record covers for Depeche Mode, I danced with Bono, discussed art with Mick Jagger, and drank tea with Susie Sue. I also grew up during those turbulent times in England in the late 70s and was driven by the do-it-yourself ethos of punk. I obsessed over bands like Joy Division and New Order and went on to work for the album cover designer Peter Saville. I believe that year, that moment in 1976, when a bunch of foul-mouthed yobs cursed and swore on national television, changed the future of culture forever, and is what brought us to where we are today. So where do we go from here? Will emerging new technologies be the catalyst that tears down the walls of mediocrity, throwing culture and society into chaos and revolution again? We'll have to wait and see. This has been another episode of Destroy. Thank you for listening. Destroy is a Be Right Back Studios production. Learn more at berightbackstudios.com. And please tune in again for another episode of Destroy, the Influence of Punk podcast, wherever you listen or download.